Well, hello. So glad we get the opportunity to continue our series on the prayers of the Old Testament, taking a look at how the ancient Israelites utilized prayer, sometimes for positive things, sometimes for negative things. But we're able to use these examples to show how we can better utilize prayer, what our goals should be, what our execution of the prayer should be, and how we can make sure that our prayers are more closely aligning ourselves with God's will. The past couple of ones that we've looked at have been primarily negative examples, which would be expected when you look at something like the book of Judges. But the prayer that we're going to look at today is a wonderful example. It's a really incredible prayer. It's actually one of my favorite prayers of the entire Old Testament. And that's going to be the prayer of Hannah in 1 Samuel chapter 2. If you're not familiar with the story, Hannah is the mother of the titular character Samuel. Samuel is going to be this incredible prophet of the Lord. He is one of the outstanding characters of the Old Testament. And Hannah herself is an example of faith and trust in the Lord, even in difficult circumstances. And Hannah is the second of two wives of a man named Penuel. And she is kind of in this really terrible situation where her, I guess for lack of a better term, maybe her fellow wife is bearing multiple children and everything, and she just is barren. She is so distraught about this that she's not able to provide for her husband a child, and she wants so desperately to do this, and so she's praying to the Lord, and she makes this vow that if the Lord will bless her with a child, she will dedicate that child to the Lord, and the Lord hears that prayer because the Lord is good and the Lord is loving and kind, and so he blesses Hannah with this child, and Hannah does exactly what she vows she's going to do. But the prayer we want to focus on is actually the prayer in chapter 2 after these events occurred, where Hannah offers this really incredible prayer of thanksgiving. And it's really cool because it's more than thanksgiving. Really, as far as the book of Samuel is concerned, it's kind of like a prologue to the entire book of 1st and 2nd Samuel about, the idea that ultimately the king is going to be God himself. Yahweh is the true king of Israel. But let's go ahead and dive into this prayer, and you'll see some of the really great things that we're talking about. So in 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 1, it says, Hannah prayed and said, "My heart exults in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth speaks boldly against my enemies because I rejoice in thy salvation. There is no one holy like the Lord. Indeed, there is no one besides thee, nor is there any rock like our God. Boast no more so very proudly. Do not let arrogance come out of your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and with him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are shattered, but the feeble gird on strength. Those who were full hire themselves out for bread, but those who were hungry cease to hunger. Even the barren gives birth to 7, but she who has many children languishes. The Lord kills and makes alive. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and rich. He brings low. He also exalts. He raises the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with nobles and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he set the world on them. He keeps the feet of his godly ones, and the wicked ones are silenced in darkness. For not by might shall a man prevail. Those who contend with the Lord are shattered. Against them he will thunder in the heavens. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth, and he will give strength to his king, will exalt the horn of his anointed. And I think I said Penuel was the name of her husband earlier. It's actually Elkanah. I'm confusing characters there. I just saw that in verse 11. This is a really cool prayer, but you also might be reading that and being like, this is kind of a weird prayer of thanksgiving, especially because it doesn't seem like Hannah actually explicitly says, God, thank you for providing me with a son, which is what we typically think of when we think of a prayer of thanksgiving is, God, thank you for doing this. You're so good. Thank you. This is a much more in-depth prayer. It's more than just saying the words thank you, which obviously are a good thing to do. But Hannah is actually taking the time to praise God for who he is, not just the one specific act of making a barren woman pregnant, although that is mentioned in there that even the barren have 7 children. But she's praising God for who he is because she recognizes this is not just a random action, but this is part of God's character. That this is who God is as Yahweh, as the Elohim of Elohims, as the Lord of Lords. God does this type of thing. And so she praises God for who he is, that he does bring justice for the oppressed. He does bring mercy and kindness for those who love him. And really, she is putting this all in a broader context of not just what God has done for her, but what God does for all mankind. And it's kind of subtle, but really this prayer is also kind of what is scholastically called a polemic, which is a special type of speech that's kind of talking against something. And so in history, there's many examples of people that give politician polemics. And so the Philippics are a type of polemic that was against Philip of Macedon, that were railing against him as a terrible influence. Don't let him come in. Don't let him be the ruler. But this polemic is not against a person. It's really against other gods and those who follow after other gods. And to understand that, you really have to look at the context of Hannah's prayer. Remember, Hannah is essentially living at the end of this time period where we see the book of Judges, where all of Israel is going about and doing what they see as right in their own eyes, which is, turned out terribly throughout the book of Judges. So she's seen the effects of idolatry. She's seen how powerful the pull of idolatry is. And one of the big reasons for following idols was fertility. Fertility was a huge deal in the ancient world, both in the sense of fertility of crops and making sure you had enough agriculture to sustain yourself, but also fertility in children. Lineage was a huge deal in this culture. And so if you couldn't bear children, you were kind of a lesser individual. And so one of the things the idols promised was fertility. And that's why a lot of the gods were gods of one thing, but also sometimes gods of sex or gods of fertility or gods of rain or harvest or thunder or whatever it may be. They related to these ideas of a bountiful gift. And so a lot of times nations turned to idols because there was promises that if you serve Baal, he'll give you fruitful rains as a god of thunder, and he'll also give you children as a god of fertility. And so for Hannah, she has rejected those gods. She's rejected the idolatrous way of thinking, and she's instead put her trust in Yahweh because she recognizes that Yahweh is the true source of all of these things. Yahweh is the only one who can truly bring about a reversal of her position where she's barren and she's hoping to be reversed that into being fruitful. And she says that's one of the things that God does. This is one of the really cool lines in this, is kind of this series of contrast, that the bows of the mighty are shattered, but the feeble gird on strength. Those who are full hire themselves out for bread, but those who are hungry cease to hunger. Even the barren gives birth to 7, but she who has many children languishes. The Lord kills and makes alive. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and rich. He brings low. He also exalts. He raises the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with nobles and inherit a seat of honor. And so you have this kind of series of reversals that God does these things, that God sometimes overturns, what the world would think of as the natural order, and he brings about his way. He brings about his justice. And so it really, if you think about it, sounds a lot like the Beatitudes, where Jesus is talking about, blessed be the poor in spirit, blessed be the merciful, blessed be those who mourn. And it's kind of the same idea of reversal, that God brings about the proper conclusion to these things. And so for Hannah, it's not really a surprise that God has done these things. She clearly knows Yahweh, and she knows this is what Yahweh does. He takes a weak, enslaved nation like Israel and makes them into a powerful, conquering nation. He takes poor shepherd boys and turns them into his faithful kings. He takes barren women and makes them the mother to one of his greatest prophets. This is what the Lord does. He works in surprising and unexpected ways. And so when she is being thankful, when she is expressing her thanksgiving for what God has done for her, she expresses it by affirming who the Lord is, by recognizing that this is not some random act of chance. This is who God is. This is what he does. And she then kind of makes this extended point, the idea that, there are those who boast before the Lord. There are those who are arrogant before Yahweh. Well, they're going to be the ones that ultimately they get their just reward. And there's kind of this contrast drawn between Hannah and her fellow wife, that her fellow wife is just this really, mean person, is teasing her, is really probably doing worse than that, is berating her for not being able to bear children. And Hannah basically says, now the position's reversed. Now I'm the one who has children. I have the love of my husband. And she sees that as an example of God bringing about justice in his situation. But she extends it even further in verse 10. We'll really look at verse 9. He keeps the feet of his godly ones, but the wicked ones are silenced in darkness. For not by might shall a man prevail. Those who contend with the Lord will be shattered. Against them he will thunder in the heavens. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king, and he will exalt the horn of his anointed. And so Hannah is actually expressing faith. And remember, Hannah's in the judge period. Even Samuel is going to be in the judge period. He's essentially the last of the judges. Hannah is expressing faith that God's promises for a king, because remember, God's made that promise all the way back in Deuteronomy, that there's going to be a king in Israel. He's going to be a faithful man. He's going to serve the law. Hannah has faith in God's promises, and she sees her blessing, her fruitfulness as a result of God's answering her prayers. She sees that as evidence and reason for confidence in the hope that God has given Israel, that it's not always going to be like the days of the judges. It's not always going to be these terrible times of constant invasion and upheaval and things being overturned. Eventually there is going to be a king, and the Lord is going to empower him, and the Lord is going to have this king that will reign in righteousness and justice and love of the law. And so for us, I think what we see in this is a really beautiful example of what thankfulness looks like. Thankfulness is more than just saying the words thank you. That's obviously always good. But thankfulness is recognizing who God is and praising him and saying the words and recognizing that our blessings are part of a broader pattern of who God is. And so our thankfulness is partly dependent upon us knowing who God is, knowing that, it's not random luck that things happen to us, but that it's part of a God who is good, who is loving kindness, who is a God of justice, who reverses the ways the world might often think of things. And so if we recognize who God is, we can praise him properly and see the things that he does for us, not as, just luck of the draw, this time God did something for us, but instead we see it as part of the broader pattern of the fact that God is faithful to his promises. Thankfulness also means that we reject the influence of other things, that we put our trust not in the modern idols of the world, not in the modern sources of fertility and security and power and wealth, but instead we put our trust in Yahweh, because idolatry is well and alive today. It doesn't have to be, a specific golden statue. When we hold something up as a source of power and we put our trust in that thing as our source of confidence, we've made that into an idol. It's not just something we love, it's something that we put our trust in, something that we put our hope in. Politicians can be idols. Political parties can be idols. Our jobs can become idols. Our family, our love can even become idols if we use it in the wrong way. And so thankfulness to God is rejecting the influence of idols and instead putting our trust and our hope and our confidence in God and God alone. And thankfulness also, if you look at the story of Hannah, it's about realizing that God sometimes works in his timing. Hannah is barren for many years. But she never loses faith that God is able to change this. And also, I have high confidence that if Samuel had never been born, Hannah still would not have lost her faith, because that's the kind of faith that she has in God, that she clearly knows God. Even if she had never been blessed with Samuel, it would not have shaken her belief, because she knows that God will ultimately, in the end times, in all things, will make things right. And even if she looks around herself and sees terrible leadership and terrible judges like Eli, who talks to her and thinks she's drunk, and she sees all that's wrong in the world, she still has confidence that God's going to bring a king. God's going to fix these things. Even if I don't have empirical evidence right now around me, even if I don't have a child yet, I know that God is able to do these things and that God will work in his time to do this. And so I think Hannah's prayer is a beautiful example of what thanksgiving looks like, that it's more than just the words thank you. It's recognizing who God is. It's recognizing what he does for us. It's appreciating that and recognizing it as part of who he is. And it's keeping our faith in him and rejecting these other sources of confidence and hope and placing our trust solely in God, no matter the result. We can be thankful. We can give thanksgiving even when we don't get the things that we've been praying for, because we can recognize that God is still good, that God is who he claims to be, and that even if our temporary plans are upset, even if the things we had hoped for don't happen, it doesn't change what God is going to be able to do. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that gives you some things to think about. Thanksgiving is one of those things that I think we talk a lot about, But the Bible is so rich in application with that, and it gives us, I think, broader perspectives on what it means to be thankful to the Lord. That it's not just a singular event, but it's a thanksgiving for all of what God does and all of who he truly is. So thank you so much for tuning in. We hope it's been edifying for you to study these things. We hope you continue to grow with us in our prayer life, that we continue to use these lessons and exhibit thankfulness in our prayers in the same way that Hannah does. We appreciate so much you tuning in. We hope to see you again next time. God bless, and we'll see you then.